Africa's September Purchasing Managers Index, known as the PMI, down to 49.1, and that's an 8-month low, coming down from 56.5. And of course, the strike in the automotive sector hurt new sales orders, and that suggests a slowdown in manufacturing as well. Kunrad Besaidnot is Executive Director of the Manufacturing Circle, joins us now. Kunrad, that's quite a big drop there. Are you concerned about this?
Very much so, particularly because, and it's quite understandable really, because the automotive sector really accounts for around 30% of manufacturing in South Africa. It hurts the component manufacturers, it hurts upstream guys in the mining sector who doesn't have a market for their materials and so on. So of course it's something that's of real concern to us. The length that these strikes are going to carry on for really determines what the impact is going to be. But we can be sure that in coming months figures are still going to be depressed as a result of it.
Just looking at those numbers, you mentioned that vehicle sales, or not sales, excuse me, but manufacturing in the vehicle plants in particular had an impact because of the strike action. Would you say that these numbers might be short-lived for the moment, and hopefully if we see a resolution that might bring an end to the strike action, could change the PMI index?
You know, I don't really think that the impact is going to be that short-lived. I think it's because the supply chains take time to recover. And of course, procurement timelines are quite long, 3 to 6 months. So there's going to be disruption that's going to be felt on some level for still some time to come. I think really what is very important, what we should remember is that vehicle manufacturing in South Africa works because of the incentive structure that we have in place. But there is some warning signs with regards to our fiscal sustainability in South Africa that we need to be aware of. We are going to maintain these incentive programs only for as long as we get sufficient reward out of them. Every time there is a strike like this, that reward that we get is going to go down. Every time there is a strike like this, future investments which local plants compete with in relation to their international competitors in other countries that they compete with are going to be in danger. The investors are going to say, but you had those disruptions with the previous cycle that was awarded, we're not so sure that we should send it here again. And that's really something, the impact's not only going to be felt now, it's not only going to be 5 billion rand that's going to disappear off GDP growth, it may be felt in the future as well.
Kunrad, earlier Chris Gilmore was in the studio and Ian Cruikshanks, we were talking to Chris Gilmore and Ian Cruikshanks in the studio, and he was saying now there's an opportunity if the strike isn't too long for them to catch up. And I was about to be nasty about our productivity and rate, say if it's so easy to catch up, that means they're not really working very hard at the moment. In other words, in normal times, productivity is not high. If your productivity is very high, it shouldn't be easy to catch up because you've got to work really hard. So at what point is it possible to catch up and the damage is limited, and then after that the ripple effects really get bad?
Look, the automotive sector is one of the sectors where productivity is probably the best in South Africa. It's also one of the sectors where productivity is less dependent on the number of hands on the production line because it's such an automated process. So presumably there is the possibility for them to catch up. But thinking in terms of the short-term impact is really falling into a trap. The conditions which bring about these protracted violent strikes are still in place. In fact, they are worsening. We just saw various pieces of legislation going through Parliament where again there was 11th hour concessions to Labour after a very long consultation process that went through NEDLAC, which is a broken institution, and went to Parliament, which is also a broken institution. Now, are we going to fix those institutions that deliver these subpar outcomes, that deliver these outcomes that make the economy not grow in a way that will give us the jobs that will secure a peaceful future for South Africa? Because we are not heading to something that's pretty. We are heading to something that's quite dangerous.
I'd like to take a couple of steps back to the incentives that he mentioned just a short while ago. And if we're all aware of this, both the workers and the unions, together with corporate South Africa who manufacture the vehicles, as well as government, then why aren't we doing something to stop the strikes from happening in the first place then?
Because the way that the debate takes place in places like NEDLAC and elsewhere in the tripartite alliance, we speak about the economy, but it's not really about the economy. The economy is a proxy battle for something else, and that something else is who is reigning supreme in the tripartite alliance. You've mentioned the election year earlier on today. That's very real. I mean, all the crazies are out. The funny business has started, and it's going to continue for some time to come. After that, it's another 3 years till the next ANC conference where there's going to be a leadership change. We saw what happened 10 years ago, well, no, 5 years ago. So, I mean, the situation really is one of immense inertia around addressing economic issues because it's all about politics. It's about who wins and who loses.
You used a couple of strong words there. You said NEDLAC as an institution is broken and Parliament is broken. Perhaps not broken, in a sense they came up with consensus, they worked hard, they did a process, it's that they're ignored. So parliamentary oversight procedures in the end become a toy telephone, they don't seem to be paid any heed to. So does the answer to your question about who's running the Tripartite Alliance, it's COSATU?
Well, I think they achieve a number of concessions. I want to go back to NEDLAC. That institution is broken because there are a number of those negotiations that are threatened all the time by the fact that politics plays too big a part. If you look at those negotiations around the recent laws that went through Parliament, there was consensus around some issues, but around key issues there were not. They weren't consensus. They weren't parties coming together. And as long as there's this battle between government and Labour for supremacy in the Tripartite Alliance, business is always going to be the one that's excluded, which means you can't get Team South Africa going.
You mentioned there that you mentioned the weak points there with regard to NEDLAC, and it seems as though even though there are continued calls for more negotiations, more discussions, more cooperation between all these
more
three
talk
parties.
about talk.
Exactly, but how can we change that and change talk into action?
Political courage. That's what we need. We need to stop managing relations, and we need to government needs to take decisions that are in favor of the country, that looks out for the interests of the country, and government needs to take up its mediation role when it comes to stakeholders such as Labour. They need to stop wanting to manage through social dialogue and make social dialogue parties responsible for government responsibilities and start taking responsibility for managing these stakeholders that are disrupting the economy.